I would never ever pay above market rent.
Today, I'm super excited to be here with Monish. He is the CEO and founder at Angie's Stays. He's also short-term rental mentor. He mentors other co-hosts and operators and arbitrage operators as well. So what's your background? How did you get involved in vacation rentals, and what was the model you first got involved with?
So I started learning about it. I was really skeptical. Like nobody had really heard about this at that point. But then I could tell like this could work. And I'm now buying outside of California. I'm still growing my arbitrage and co-hosting portfolio in California.
Just going back to kind of the timeline, you figured out that arbitrage was something worth scaling and continuing to develop. But when do you start co-hosting as well?
I would have said co-hosting is king. And right now I'm becoming more friendly towards arbitrage. I do make a lot more profit via arbitrage versus co-hosting. I think gritting my teeth and dealing with the liability of the rents has forced me and taught me to become hardy in this business.
What changed about your sales process that allowed you to crack the code there?
I've scrubbed my own toilets. I wiped down my own shelves, bathtubs. I'm willing to do what it takes in order to succeed. But it is challenging to do projections and things like that. They're looking at slow season and they look at an empty calendar and they just get terrified.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality, and where we invite entrepreneurs, investors, founders, operators, leaders in the vacation rental and hospitality space so they can tell us about their stories, the lessons they have learned along the way, as well as maybe some of the mistakes that they might have made along the way so we don't have to make those same mistakes ourselves. Today, I'm super excited to be here with Monish. He is the CEO and founder at Angie's Stays. He's also short-term rental mentor. So he mentors other co-hosts and operators and arbitrage operators as well. We're going to be discussing, his story, how he got into this vacation rental world. We'll be touching on the different models that Monish has experience with, from co-hosting to arbitrage to ownership and actual, full-on real estate investment and everything in between. We'll be talking how to grow a management portfolio from, his sales background and, the creative approach that he's put in place as far as, referrals and homeowner acquisition strategies as well. So super excited to dig deeper into this conversation. Monish, thanks so much for taking the time to be here today. Let's start with, understanding you've been doing this for a few years now. If you were to start all over again with the knowledge that you have today and you could do anything differently or give yourself some piece of advice, what would that be?
Yeah, thanks for the warm intro, Sebastian. That's a really good first question. I feel like honestly, if I was starting today, I would probably go to the Midwest and start looking at one bedrooms, apartments, and trying to pick up like 5 or 10 in one building. When I first started, I was really aggressive and I picked up 16 in one building and I think that was really cool. But now looking at it, I feel like I would tell myself to be more varied. Go to different apartments, get different amenities, different offerings, change it up a bit because people like unique experiences on Airbnb. So if I was to start today, I would definitely start in like a road less traveled, do something a little more unique. It's as far as location or market. And then I would stick with like 5 or 10 one bedrooms per apartment complex.
So where is that coming from as far as, like, is it just the uniqueness, like in terms of trying to have inventory from the get-go that doesn't put you in the commodity category, or is there something else to you wanting to do that differently that I'm missing on?
Yeah, so it's mainly this, right? It's like if you have, let's say you have a bunch of offerings in one apartment complex and there's a certain subset of demand for that apartment complex, it can look like you're not kind of cannibalizing yourself at the beginning. Um, but then as time goes on, you might find that there's other operators who will come in and try to do different apartments and provide more competition. So I think the best way to win is to provide a more varied experience on Airbnb. So kind of like, I know we were talking earlier, but one of the things that I really like to do is provide a unique interior design for each unit. So even if it's multiple units in the same building, like I don't paint the same colors. I don't even pick the same design. When we had 16 units in one apartment building, which after some time we decided to shrink that down to 10, we had like 16 different designs. None of them were repeated. And it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun at the end of it too, because we got to see a lot of really aesthetic art pieces everywhere.
And now we might be getting into technicalities too fast here, but we'll go back to macro and the story and whatnot. But one of the things you and I were talking about earlier was the multi-unit setup, right? Of trying to essentially optimize occupancy levels and whatnot by having a room type that is what the guest sees on the front end, and then in the back end you have this assignment of the actual room depending on availability and whatnot. But one of the things that's crucial to selecting those multi-unit categories or bedroom types is the fact that the rooms have to be equal or very very similar between them. So would the fact that each room has a very different design would be kind of like counterproductive for the purposes of using this approach? You still prefer to have uniqueness and differentiation between units from a design perspective, despite not being able to leverage that for a multi-unit distribution approach.
Yeah, so originally that's what we thought would be an issue. We thought that the design, because it's different for each unit, it might potentially cause problems. But ultimately for us, we really have well, I guess we had three types of units. We had king units, full units, like units with full beds, and then two twin units. Majority of our units were king and full beds. But ultimately, like we were definitely upfront with the fact that the design elements could change, but we gave examples of each type of room with a desk. And so with that, we don't anticipate any issues. We haven't really seen any issues. We've already done quite a few like reassigning of rooms.
Hmm.
And I'd say one out of maybe 100 guests mentioned the fact that, oh, like this desk is in a different place than what I saw in the photo.
Hmm.
And we'll just work with them to make it work. So for example, if they just want the bed and desk arranged, and a lot of that rooms category gets midterm rentals. So it's like longer stays. So it's completely worth that effort to say, hey, we'll rearrange some furniture for you. It's like an hour of my handyman's labor. No big deal. You
Hmm. 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 Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about, so because this is so central to what you think you would do differently. The fact of having more, diversity of inventory, more uniqueness of inventory, not to be on the commodity side of things. What does that process look like of you going in and being very thoughtful about your decoration and how you want to position this as a unique listing? Is it really more just gut feeling and your personal design taste, or is there some kind of a strategy you follow to try to look similarly to whatever is in the market that's performing well, or maybe it's the opposite, you want to be just
Well,
looking
yeah,
completely
it's usually the
differently?
opposite.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what we do. I used to do it all myself, and now I've outsourced this to one of my team members.
Hmm.
But basically, what I taught her is, hey, let's look at about 20 to 30 similar listings. Whether it's so, we're doing one bedroom apartments. Let's find 20 to 30 of the top one bedroom apartments in this market, and let's see what the design schemes are that they have. And most markets, I mean, unless you're talking like really advanced like New York City, San Francisco markets, but most markets, they all follow a similar design. Like if you're out in Nashville, Tennessee, there's some kind of modern country design happening there, which by all means, modern country will kill it in Nashville. Like it will do great. But there's also other things to look at, like the color schemes that are typically done. Usually it's a lot of neutral colors, not a lot of pops of colors there.
Hmm.
So we can look at what the typical colors are that we see in terms of the accent walls, the decor, things like that. And then we literally will pull up a color wheel and then just see like what's on the opposite X end of the color wheel and just see what sticks out if we're comparing it. So that's something that we'll do, looking at the top 30 listings, pick like two or three of the most common colors and then choose colors that are opposite that when designing our unit.
That's good. That's good. Makes sense. Now tell us more about how you got into this space. What's your background? How did you get involved in vacation rentals, and what was the model you first got involved with?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to that story. It's kind of funny. I actually started with my first foray into real estate was house hacking, where I was living in the Bay Area, working in tech sales, and I just hated the concept of paying rent. So I rented a 5 bedroom house, and then I rented out the other 4 bedrooms to other like people working in tech in the Bay Area. And it was like 2019 growing time, and things, were going great. It was super easy to rent, and I was paying, no money for a place to live. So that was fun. And then 2020 hit, and like things started to change. I was still in a good position as far as my house, but I knew that long term, like I had to figure out a solution for just like wanting to have a more free lifestyle. That was just really important to me. I knew I eventually wanted to get married, eventually start a family, and I didn't want to not be there for my family. So it was a very deep meaning for me. So my wife, it actually starts with, well, back then she was my girlfriend, but she got in a car accident. So it actually started with a car accident, um, surprisingly enough. And her doctor, who we went to after the car accident, really liked us as a couple and was
Mm.
like, "Hey, I have something to tell you. There's a business model that I think you'll find pretty interesting." And at first I was like, "Is this gonna be a pyramid scheme? Like, am I getting schemed out to join a pyramid scheme?" Um, but she put me on to Airbnb as an arbitrage business, and so I started learning about it. I was really slow at first. I was really skeptical. Like, nobody had really heard about this at that point, like 2019. And so I was really, really like slow about adopting it, but then I knew I could tell like this could work. Um, but the renting side of it just didn't work for me at first. I didn't know how to sell it as rental. So at 2020, I was like, I'm not going to try to rent it from anybody. I'm just going to buy a property, just get started, just brute force, especially because real estate, I could see the writing on the wall. So 2020 was when I bought my first property and put it up. Ironically, the market that I started in was Chico, California, and about 6 months later, or maybe it was 9 months later, Chico, California was listed on AirDNA's top 10 places to start an Airbnb business. So I'd done my research right, and saw the writing on the wall there as well, which was great. So I started with buying our first property.
If I may just
Right.
there, like what were the fundamentals that you were looking at in your analysis to that led you to decide that Chico, California was a market you were interested in, which you clearly did right, because then afterwards, AirDNA identified it as such as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Sebastian. I feel like it's actually really quite simple, like looking at it. There's all these companies, like hotel brands that will pay thousands of dollars to do market research before they will allow one of their flags to be placed in that location. So if you're looking like Marriott's, Hamptons, Sheraton's, like those big brand name hotels. So for me, I saw that there were new hotels being built there, and so I saw that there was going to be like a lot of kind of confirmed market research studies that were already done, because
Mhm.
these hotels can't be built without those market research studies being done. So just from the fact that there's all this new construction happening, it means that there was strong short-term rental demand, and there was something happening there. And sure enough, there was. There was the town that burned down in near Chico called Paradise, and so I knew that that was creating a lot of short-term rental demand as well, because all the workers that were coming in. So that was another thing that I saw as like a really big demand for that area. So yeah, just with that research, researching all the new builds, driving around, looking at all the new construction that was happening, it gave me a good sense of what was going on there.
Okay, so mainly seeing, okay, there's hotels being built, therefore they probably did their expensive market research, so I'm just gonna kind of follow along. um okay, and that first property, what was that? Also a house hacking move, or what was that? A full single family, only fully for rental, purposes, as STR rental purposes, or what was? Talk to us about that first acquisition.
Yeah, so that first home, it was, and I remember it was such a battle because at the time inventory was low, so we were like fighting for scraps in the market. But yeah, we got that first home. It was fully a vacation rental, short-term rental. We put it up right away. I remember the first month we designed it. It took us a month to design it, which now I would never ever take that long to furnish a property. You're asking what I would do differently. I would definitely say if it's a one bedroom apartment, don't take longer than 2 days to furnish it. But if it's like a single family home, you can do it in 4 or 5 days, at the
Hmm.
most, because time is money. So, but yeah, that first property took us a month. We put it up, and immediately, the very next month, we paid the mortgage, and that was only with like not much lead time to advertise it. And in the very next month, we paid the mortgage and then made also an extra $2,000 on top, which was awesome.
Nice, 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 nice. So that's kind of at that point you're thinking this is gonna be like you still had your W-2 at this point. Just to kind of get in context, was your mindset here at this point? Let's rinse and repeat. Let's buy a couple of these, and then just have that as a side income, or were you thinking scaling the real estate acquisition model? And then how does that change when you get introduced to the idea of arbitrage as something you can do at scale as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was definitely for me, I knew I wanted to scale, at all costs. Once I saw the first one working, I just knew that this is what I wanted to get into. So thankfully I was working remote, and so it was allowing me to do some more research. And I ended up picking up a second property that was very unique. It was only 3 months later, and when I saw it, I just knew I had to have it. There was this cool Japanese design on the front. It had like a Japanese red gate covering the parking driveway. The whole front yard was designed with bamboo, black bamboo. There was like Japanese red maple trees. I was like, I gotta have this. This is the perfect Airbnb experience. So yeah, less than 3 months later, I saw things working with the first one. And ironically, that was through slow season, what I knew was like slow season at the time, winter, even though I didn't really understand slow season like I do now. But yeah, I picked up our second property and I was like, this is great and it's going well, but my cash reserves are tapped now. And while I'm still working the job, I'm working in tech sales, so decent income, but I could tell that this is going to be much slower to quitting my job than I would like. And so maybe there is something to the rental arbitrage business that I should try again. And so that's when I started getting back into the concept of rental arbitrage and just deciding, okay, I'm going to stick with scaling through rental arbitrage for a while, and just see what I can do with that.
And before we go into that process of scaling the arbitrage side, anything particular about the financing of these first two properties? Was it just a traditional kind of like personal loan? Was there anything, any creative financing component to your approach? Did you have to refinance the first to help finance the second, or what did that financing look like?
I was very green and I put like a whole bunch of money down for the first property that I realized for the second property I really didn't have to. So I was a W-2, so I was qualifying for these homes super easy. Like now, as purely a business owner, I've learned that like qualifying for homes is very, very much different than what it was when I had a W-2. So yeah, so one thing I will say is like for sure, one thing I learned is that you don't need to put a whole bunch of money down for the home. You definitely just I put in like the least amount that they're asking, whether it's like 15% or 10%, whatever I can get with the DSCR creative loans that I'm doing now. But back then I didn't need to do anything fancy. I was just putting in, the standard conventional financing, which worked for me.
And for those first properties, in terms of like the analysis you did prior to acquiring them, was there, because there are some people that are like, okay, I want to make sure that I buy at a price where even if I have to rent this, as a long-term rental at some point, then I'll be able to pay my mortgage, and it's going to be fine. And that's part of the numbers they run, versus people that, kind of go all in on the fact that this property will have to perform, as an STR What was your approach on that back then, and has that evolved?
So I think some background here. I definitely like to think about worst case scenarios if I'm doing some kind of like investment or making a decision, like how will I be prepared for a worst case scenario? And I guess to provide some background, I watched my dad and what he experienced in the 2008 real estate crash and kind of what happened to him. He was just getting started with real estate investing. Other than his personal home in 2007 is when he bought his first investment home. He bought it with, I would say probably he bought it and put a renter in there. And I think the renter was paying rent that was like $1,500 or $1,000 underneath the mortgage cost. So already my dad was underwater and he was just betting solely on appreciation. Um, so watching that happen to him and like him dealing with the consequences of that made me decide that any real estate transaction that I do, yes, like short-term rent absolutely is going to generate more revenue. And I should, there's definitely like the option of going all in on short-term rent or nothing. But I like to have a backup scenario, like, hey, worst case scenario, what happens? Let's say everything goes south. I'll be able to long-term rent it and cover the mortgage. So for me, I had a couple things going where like in 2020, everybody could bet on appreciation, right? There was no doubt in anyone's mind. The interest rates were low. If you're paying attention to what was going on, you know that your properties are going to appreciate. But the number one most important thing for me was if I was to long term rent it, will it cover the mortgage? And so that's what was important for me. The supply was so low when I bought that I kind of just took the first decent property I could find. I wanted turnkey. I knew I didn't want to wait because based on the revenue that I was generating, let's say I waited 3 to 6 months to rehab a property and make it turnkey, I would have probably like maybe the appreciation would have been worth it, but I would have lost so much money through Airbnb revenue
Mhm.
that I was like, this is worth it. Like, say I'm making 4K a month at 6 months, that's 24K of potential revenue that I lost. So the rehab probably wouldn't have been worth it, unless I found a smash and deal. And in California, it was just not, you're not going to find anything on the MLS that's smashing. So yeah, so that was my mindset. I just want to make sure, and that's still my process today. I just bought another quadplex and I'm now buying outside of California just with the state of today's interest rates. Unless you're buying off market and getting like pretty good with it. And even then, even if you find a really good deal, the chances are your long-term rent's not going to cover the mortgage. So with that, I'm now buying outside of California, although I'm still growing my arbitrage and co-hosting portfolio in California. My purchases are now more geared towards other areas where the rents would cover mortgages.
Hmm. Yeah. And now, with your knowledge today, when you decided on the next market that you wanted to buy next, did you follow the same approach of just looking where hotels were being built? Or did you add other variables into the consideration now with the knowledge you have in terms of trying to identify that next ideal market for you to invest in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I started to get a little more creative and more detailed with it, where I don't know if creative is the right word, but I guess it's more detailed, where I started to look. So, for example, this market that I'm into, their city promised to invest something along the tunes of, I forgot what it was, but like quite a few millions of dollars into the tourism industry by 2030. So they had specific plans to invest into tourism and they already had the budget set aside for that. So for me, that was a really, really strong plot. Regulation, the regulatory environment has changed a lot from Airbnb for Airbnb since 2020. Back in 2020, things were still the wild, wild west. You could pop up an Airbnb anywhere. Chances are the regulations were friendly and you were kind of good to rent. Now there's certain markets that are more regulation friendly versus not. And that's one thing, like you mentioned, I am a mentor, I have students, and that's one thing that I tell my students all the time, especially the ones from California. Just because you see regulation doesn't mean that you should shy away from that market. If anything, if you're able to enter a regulatory market and be one of the few short-term rentals in there, you'll actually be a lot more competitive. You'll have less season struggles to worry about. There's all these amazing things that come about in regulatory markets. So that's one
Mhm.
thing that I urge all my students is like, hey, don't be shy, don't be scared about these markets. You can definitely make it work. But yeah, so as far as that, those were some of the things I looked at, just doing the deeper dive research, doing my own market study. And the great thing is today with ChatGPT, it's a lot easier to do market studies than it was before.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's for sure. Now, talk to us about what you saw or learned, that made you see the arbitrage model as the thing that you would decide to, focus on working towards as far as scaling your portfolio. Because you talked about how at first you were even skeptical about the model, so you decided to buy your own thing instead. But then, yeah, what changed that led you to say, you know what, this makes sense now, I see it, and I see myself scaling through this model.
Yeah. So I think really what it was that my sales process wasn't working before. And then when I changed things up in my sales process, I started to see like success. I think and also I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, which things were very different than I was actually getting thrown out at a lot of doors and just with my original pitch and approach. I had some several negative reactions, so it made me think that maybe this isn't as simple as what it was made out to be. And then after I kind of started to see the success with the bought properties, and again, remember my mortgages were pretty much the same or slightly lower than what rents would be. So that's where I was like, well, if I could just rent these properties, first of all, I would get my money back within, 5 or 6 months or less. Because at the time everything was just flowing so well. I knew I needed to pick up as many as I could. So that's where I started to like shift my mindset into, okay, rental arbitrage will give me more returns faster, and I'll actually be able to quit my job much sooner by doing a rental arbitrage business versus
Mhm.
buying properties, one a year, which is about the pace that I was buying it to start with.
And by your sales process, you mean, the effort of you trying to convince, the landlords to allow you to sublease and do short-term rentals.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
And what changed about your sales process that allowed you to crack the code there?
The main difference was that I started screening out the landlords before I would show up in person. So before I was spending all this time, setting up tours and then at the tours explaining to the landlords what my business model was and what I was going to
Mm.
do. Um, and it of course I got a bunch of tours because I was basically scheduling all these different ones, but it was just so much work to spend an hour working through it with each landlord, going to the tour, driving around and getting rejection after rejection versus once I started to use the phone calls to screen the landlords to see that if they might be amenable to my business model and then show up in person. Because there's one thing that you learn in sales is that the closer you can get to a face-to-face meeting, the more you're able to persuade them to get them to do what you want. So it's just like the more, real life you can get with them, the more likely they are to trust you and to be, willing to work with you and that sort of thing. So it is important to meet landlords in person, but it's in order to save time, it's really important to screen them first.
Okay. And then once you're screening them, I'm sure there are some early indicators of like, okay, this sounds like this is going to be a landlord that's going to be open to this idea of allowing me to do this. What are some of those things you're looking for at that stage in terms of on the phone, kind of like getting a sense of whether this is something that they're open to, and do you see landlords becoming more open, less open, as there's more and more people doing arbitrage, to having this kind of conversations?
Yeah, so basically I'm seeing if the landlord is open to a different type of lease arrangement. Like if they're looking for just the standard, hey, I want a tenant who I know who is, screened by me and I know exactly what's going on with him. If they're really strict on that, I could try a couple things and just expose them to a couple concepts to change their mind. But if they're really insistent on it, they're not somebody I want to meet in person and speak with. If they're open to trying something different, if they're open to kind of trusting me and seeing that I have a portfolio, I have kind of expertise in this, I can help take care of their property. If they're open to that kind of concept, then yeah, then I know it's worth having a further conversation. And what was your second question? I forgot what
Well,
you had
just
asked.
to go deeper here. So if because do you just hint it on the phone and drop the ball, so to speak, in person, or do you like kind of spill the tea, like you're like, this is what I'm thinking, like when you say, are they open to a different model, or they're stuck with having to do this very traditional way of renting, are you kind of like specifying, early on what you're thinking of by something creative, or you're just kind of like throwing some hints just to see, okay, yeah, there's some openness here, but you still have not kind of like specified the model. I'm sure it's going to be different from case to case, but I'm particularly interested in like understanding what's different, as far as the conversations you're having today from those things versus the conversations you were having when you first started.
So it's definitely more of a hint, I would say, because if I go right out the get bat and I'm like, "Hey, I want to Airbnb your property,"
Yeah.
they're just gonna they're pretty much gonna tell me to screw off right away. And so I find that it is good to have, like, I guess just like the emotional intelligence of it. You kind of wading in the waters, you're feeling it out, you're seeing if they want to go jump into the deep end with you. If they are, great, let's set up a meet in person and let's figure that out, if that's an option. So, yeah, I do find that it's better to, like, approach it slowly, but at the same time, just by feeling them out on the phone, you can tell whether this is gonna be worth your time, and that might be something that comes with experience too. Maybe
Hmm.
because 'cause I've done, like, probably thousands of these calls now at this point, I know what's gonna be more worth my time versus not. And what's interesting is I've had some landlords who, after talking with me, they're like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do this myself." And then they do it themselves, and they don't actually like doing it themselves. Like
Hmm.
most landlords want to just be like lazy landlords, and and so they actually come back to me and they're like, "Hey, we like you. We want you to manage it. Can you manage it?" And so I've actually gotten co-host deals that way too. Um,
Hmm. Hmm. And then the second question was just, do you find it harder now, like as more people have gotten exposed to the model of arbitrage, and what it is and how to do it, do you find it to be more difficult, to achieve these days in terms of getting those, arbitrage, you know, contracts, or is it just same as it has always been? It's just a numbers game, and it's always going to be hard, but you just got to keep trying.
If anything, I feel like it's easier now, and a
Eh,
big reason for that is because a lot more landlords are, like, exposed to this business model, so it's not as challenging or as, like, a, "Whoa, like, what is this?" Kind of thing when I
Interesting.
talk to them. So for me, at least, and maybe that's just the markets that I'm in, but, like, just because they understand what I'm doing, it's just, like, so much smoother. And one of them even told me that they, like, were really hoping to find someone like me to manage their property because they, like they just really wanted somebody who would take care of their property and, like, all the benefits that come with us, working with them. So it was, like, almost like I answered their prayers. It was kind of funny. But,
Hmm.
yeah, so I think that I mean, it's a big benefit to landlords, right? And, like, as a personal homeowner myself, I know that I would rather use this business model than long-term rent, as long as it's an option, as long as I'm in the regulatory compliance. So I know that this is more beneficial to landlords. So when I come in, I'm kind of coming with that confidence and that swagger that, like, hey, this is something that's going to be a great thing for you.
Hmm.
And especially, like, if you look at the longest lease that I have now, I think we're looking at 6 years as the
Okay.
longest lease.
Okay.
So yeah, that's pretty awesome for the landlord to not have to deal with turnover, damages. I've only bogged him for repairs like maybe 2 or 3 times over that time period. It's pretty good experience for them.
And right, in terms of like the benefits for the landlord, you just mentioned a few. One being you don't have to worry about turnover, another being you don't have to worry about minor repairs because I'll be taking care of all of those, after every, checkout. Another might be, the fact that, you won't be having to deal with guests that don't pay rent, and well, not guests, tenants that don't pay rent, and then you cannot,
Well, here's a big one, right? So with
protection.
long-term tenants,
Mhm.
you have somebody in there who, let's say they flood a bathroom. Because I also manage an apartment complex. So this happened to me with my long-term tenants. So let's say you have a tenant who floods a bathroom, and this happens like halfway through their lease. They're embarrassed about it and they don't tell the landlord. And then 6 months later, they move out and you find out that there's a huge hole in the ceiling because that water has just been rotting through the plumbing or through the insulation, and it just, like, went through the ceiling and everything fell through. Well, with us, when we're managing the property, you're not dealing with that because we need to have the property in move-in ready condition. So if something like that happens, we're not going to keep it a secret from the landlord. We're going to tell them right away, and then we're going to get the issue fixed right away before it becomes this deeper problem with mold and rot and all these different things that could
Yeah.
happen when
Yeah.
these things are left, undone.
Mhm.
So that's a huge, huge benefit because I've seen landlords, and we've actually rescued landlords from their long-term tenants issues by providing them like contractors to repair. And they're like, hey, I just spent $2,000 fixing this issue that this tenant caused by leaving it in here. Now I want you to manage because I don't want to deal with this ever
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
So
So you're taking the
mm,
headache away from having to deal with anything maintenance related. There's the protection of not, especially in states that are very pro tenant. There's a lot of risk involved with, like that long-term lease, and then what if they don't pay and whatnot. How much do you have to play the card of, or how often do you feel like there's a need to play the card of, I'll pay you a premium, I'll pay you more than what a long-term tenant would pay? Like, is that even a card that needs to be played, or just there's enough benefits aside from that that you're even looking at better, better rents than what a long-term tenant would be paying?
I will never ever pay above market rent.
Interesting.
I did it for my first arbitrage deal because I was super new and I actually paid 10% above market rent. And then a year or two later, I negotiated to him to bring it down. I said, "There's no way I'm going to be, paying this any longer because I see the value that I'm providing."
Mm.
So yeah, so no, I would never ever pay above market rent. And if they're insistent on it, I'll wash my hands of it because at the end of the day, I am running a business, right? And let's say they want to increase my rent by $250 a month. Well, maybe it's not so bad. Oh, like the rent's like $3,000. What's an extra 250? Well, that's an additional $3,000 per year that could just go straight into profits for my business. So that's a significant chunk of profits. So when you look at it that way too, as a business owner, it's just not responsible for me to pay above market rent. And then also, why would I when we're taking care of the property and we're
Hmm.
doing all these other things?
Okay. And then when it comes to when you lock in contracts that are as long as 6 years, do you factor in, do you pre-agree on what an annual rent increase will be that you're both, comfortable with, or is it the same throughout the whole term? And the second question is, how do you protect yourself in terms of, like, something happens, do you have the ability to exit? What do those, exit protection clauses look like?
Yeah, great question. So, well, and actually to clarify, I didn't sign a 6-year long lease.
Okay.
That would have been sick if I negotiated that. That would have been like that's like a true commercial lease. But I signed that one was actually a 1-year lease, but the longest leases that I've signed are what 3 years. And yeah, we did negotiate a rent increase based on what we saw market rent to be at the time, increasing by. It actually ended up favoring me because the market rent ended up increasing so much more. I think once the interest rates jumped up, everybody started renting again, so rents everywhere started to skyrocket.
Hmm.
So that rent increase ended up, you know, favoring me, but also the landlord didn't have to do any marketing work to try to fill that unit. So it ended up being a win-win still. And you talked about an exit. So that's a good question. And one thing that I negotiate in all my not even negotiate, I just put like, hey, if we are going to exit a lease, we're gonna do we're gonna give you a 30-day notice, and then we'll also pay a 1 month like exit lease fee. Or I'll give you a 60-day notice. Those are
Mm,
kind of the two options for exit. So either I
okay.
give you 30-day notice, and if I'm like my concept is like worst case scenario, if I'm bleeding every month, I'd rather just give a 30-day notice and just pay another month. So that way I don't have a second month of bleeding. Um, and maybe I can just take my furniture and put it in another deal. Or, if I'm doing okay, but I just want to get out of the lease and put it into something better, I'll give it like a 60-day notice. So
Mm.
those are kind of the two options that I put for exit.
And you don't get
Um,
any pushback there.
no, I mean, because the idea isn't like I'm trying to it's not like I'm trying to screw over the landlord or I'm trying to like create an exit if like business goes wrong. Like that's not
Hmm.
the concept that I'm really putting in their head. Because obviously if that becomes a topic of discussion, then that becomes a whole other rabbit
Hmm.
hole that you have to get into in order to explain to them. So I think that for the ease of concept, it's just like, hey, this is just standard for a lease. Like we
Okay.
just do 2-month exit plans. And that gives it enough time to find the next tenant.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Now, how do you get involved with the co-hosting model? And yeah, let's start with that, and then I'll do my follow up. Well, how do you get involved with the co-hosting model?
Yeah, are you asking like how I would
You
pitch
because
it
at
or
that
how
point, no,
we
because
did it?
at that point we've been talking about, just going back to kind of the timeline. You figured out, that arbitrage was something, worth scaling and continuing to develop. But when do you start co-hosting as well? Like, when do you personally got involved with the model of co-hosting? How did that come about?
So that actually came with an apartment complex deal where we were still a startup. And so they were like, hey, we'd like to work with you. They also saw like our projections for revenue and they were like, what do you think about doing a property management model for us instead, which is basically co-hosting? So believe it or not, my first co-hosting deal was an apartment complex. So yes, it is possible to do co-hosting deals with apartment complexes. So that was one, and we had a lot of negotiations back and forth. At the time, we were rescuing this apartment complex from a severe vacancy issue that they had. Um, so college student populations were in big declines even before 2020. But once COVID hit, college rentals like died. They had like a negative 20% decline, something crazy like that. And so the college student apartment complexes in our area were feeling the hit pretty hard. And so for us, we were dealing with an apartment complex that had I think like a 40, 50 unit vacancy, something crazy like that. So we came in and pretty much were able to take a sizable portion of that through the co-hosting model and help them out. So the revenue share worked out and essentially we used like just straight accommodation revenue to keep it simple. So we didn't really do like we didn't involve anything else as far as like cleaning fees, pet fees, any of that. So that's how we did it.
And so when you look at both models and you compare them, right, there's pros and cons to each, right? Because, on one side with the arbitrage, you have more upside, but you also take on more risk and more liability and whatnot from having to have that payment of the rent. But whatever you get on top of that is all yours. So there's more upside. Whereas on the management side, the good thing is you have no initial costs, no upfront costs. You don't have to pay for, necessarily, the furnishing and whatnot. Of course, there's less upside because you're taking a cut. So how do you compare those two? Having done both, is there one you still like more than the other, and one you still have a preference for more than the other? And how do you see both kind of like coexisting? Like, do you see one as your source of cash flow for the other? Do you see the other as kind of like just the entry level approach that then leads you to the next? Like, yeah, I know there were a lot of questions there, but what are your thoughts on how
No,
they
no, yeah,
compare?
these are great questions, and honestly, it's really, really fun. And it's kind of funny because I feel like I always shift between the two. Like 6 months ago, I think, or maybe even a year ago, I would have said co-hosting is king, and I only want to go through co-hosting. And
Mm,
right now, I'm feeling more friendly towards arbitrage. I'm just like more excited to grow via arbitrage deals. So Yeah, it's a good question. I can kind of like share my concepts of both. I'm definitely my goal is to grow via both. And I always offer, to do co-hosting deals for anyone who is looking for someone to manage. I'm always like, hey, I'm happy to do it. But I will say a year ago, actually, I think it's been over a year ago. Like we had a really bad slow season and it was the winter of 2022 to 2023. And that was like the Airbnb bust, right? That was a slow season that hit everybody. The one thing that I would say it was floating our bank account was the co-hosting properties that we had. So that was when I was grateful to have a co-hosting portfolio because our arbitrage was struggling and we had to do all these changes to kind of keep up with the market. We had to shed our weaker properties. Like there was so much going on. So at that time, I was grateful for co-hosting and I was like, I just want to grow through co-hosting. So we grew through a lot of co-hosting properties. I shed some arbitrage that I didn't like. I basically shed some liabilities. And then over the last year, I've been noticing that my arbitrage portfolios have been picking up. And of course, you do make a lot more profit via arbitrage versus co-hosting. So yeah, that is definitely something. So right now I'm more friendly towards arbitrage, but I am still, like you mentioned Mintori earlier, I am still looking at working with them to kind of grow our co-hosting portfolio. We're pretty much, we're not going to say no to any type of client. A lot of property management companies out there will only just do that. They'll just do co-hosting. They don't want to take on the liability of arbitrage, but I think for me, like gritting my teeth and dealing with the liability of the rents has forced me and taught me to become hardy in this business. Like I've scrubbed my own toilets. I've wiped down my own shelves, bathtubs. I'm willing to do what it takes. I'll get, like deep in the revenue strategy. Like I'll do what it takes in order to succeed. And I feel like in a way, the arbitrage properties have forced me to do that because I knew in the back of my head, I have this liability that I have to pay.
Mm.
Um, so with that, it's actually served my co-hosting clients even better because now, I'm taking those skills that I learned from having my monthly payments and my liabilities, and I've attributed it to their co-hosting portfolio as well.
So it sounds like what changed between a year and a half or so ago and now is like the fact that it almost sounds like arbitrage is a better model when times are good, but when times are tough, again, that's when it's a tougher model. So that's where it can be a beneficial maybe to have both, so that in tough times you don't go to zero, but in tough times, you still have something coming in from the co-hosting side. Is there anything other than that that you think changed your perspective from a year and a half ago, where you were inclining yourself more, towards the co-hosting model? Co-hosting is king versus today, you're more inclined to continue growing with arbitrage. Anything other than the market being where the market was at versus where the market is at right now?
Ultimately, my long-term plan is to seek control over my own properties. And I think if there is like a gradient of control, I think at the very bottom of that gradient would be co-hosting, where you
Hmm.
have pretty much the least amount of control. The
Sure.
middle point would be rental arbitrage, where you have some decent control, but you still need to answer to the landlord on certain
Hmm.
things. And
Hmm.
then, of course, the most control that you would have is owning, where nobody can tell you what to do other than the government. As long as you're, in regulatory compliance, you can pretty much do updates to the property if you want. You can handle things how you want to in your business, how you want. You can run things the way you want to without input from others. So I think that is one thing that is definitely like leading me to preferring arbitrage. I've definitely had a lot more educational conversations with landlords just on like explaining them why I do certain things in my business and how that would benefit them. And while I'm always happy to educate, sometimes like getting like the weirdest texts late at night asking, "Hey, why are you doing this?" It's like, ugh, like, do I really have to answer this right now? So I've created a rule actually, and I think it's like I only allow landlords to really expect a response from me 2 times a month, and any more than that, they'll just have to schedule a meeting. So that's kind of the rule that I have. Yeah, and so I think with that, I just like having like full control, and that's really my long-term goal. So ultimately, I want to grow to a portfolio of like 9 or 10 owned properties that are for short-term rent, and that's my long-term goal. And yeah, I think like that's probably my goal is ideally to just have only own properties. Like long term, that's what I'm working towards.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. And it's funny because I'm kind of like mapping this out in my head, and it's like, it's a spectrum that goes from, like you were saying, the least amount of control to the most amount of control. And as you go from the least to the most, what also increases is the revenue potential. Well, not the revenue potential, but the yeah the potential to, yeah, I guess, have more upside, right? You have more upside in arbitrage than you do in co-hosting. You have more upside in ownership than you do in arbitrage, but also the capital intensiveness increases, from one to the next, right? Because
Right.
you need almost nothing, to get started with co-hosting, but then you need the furniture and the setup and whatever for the arbitrage, and then you need the down payment and to service the debt on the ownership. So that's interesting. Now, you talked about growing the co-hosting, model, the property management model, adding new homeowners on the management program. Given your sales background, you mentioned there were some things you had done that were somewhat unique as far as building those real estate agent referral relations. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was actually kind of an unexpected surprise. So I always knew that it would be helpful to connect with realtors, and I other than like property management companies, I was so busy with all the other like arbitrage and other opportunities that were coming my way. But my wife and I were actually looking at a home to buy for ourselves, and we walked into a real estate showing, and we met the realtor there, and, she was cool. We were just talking back and forth, and we told her what we did, and she was just like really excited. She's like, "Oh my gosh, you guys do short-term rentals? I need a short-term rental partner." And so she asked us a bunch of questions, and then we basically became her like short-term rental expert that she would like refer clients to us. So anybody, if she sold a home or if she was like helping them buy a home, she would let them know if they mentioned that they were interested in short-term rentals, that she had contact. So that kind of opened the door for us, and so we, like, not only got a bunch of co-hosting opportunities through her, we started doing more real estate, like, connections, just showing up to open houses, meeting realtors that way, just networking, doing coffee dates, stuff like that. And one thing that was really interesting actually that we started offering is we would go to open houses and we'd say, "Hey, I saw this has been on the market for 41 days. I'm curious, something that we've done for our landlords is we've actually, while they're selling their home, we'll short-term rent it out so that way they can generate some revenue. And, when you have showings, we just block it off for specific days. Otherwise, we're renting it out and generating some revenue. We'll take 25%, what yada, yada, yada. So, so yeah, we've been doing that and we've gotten a couple leads that way too, which is, it's honestly just I realized like sales and marketing is just it's like a billboard, right? It's a billboard, and if the billboard's in a forest, no one's going to see it. It's not going to do anything. But if you drive past the billboard 7 times a week, it's going to be in your mind. It's going to be something you think about. So even like if some of these deals we made like maybe a little bit, it just put ourselves in the realtors' minds more. And so we've gotten deals completely outside of our market because the realtors had a friend that needed help with managing a short-term rental, and so it's just like snowballs. So yeah, this game is definitely very much relationship based. And if you're comfortable making connections and just networking, it can take you pretty far.
And is there something you have found that allows you to kind of stay top of mind through time with those real estate agents? Or is just the traditional kind of like you have to remember or set yourself a reminder or whatever that might be? Or have you found any system or any other creative approach to ensuring that you remain top of mind with them?
Gosh, I wish I had something. I think I really just find excuses to touch base with realtors. There is something that I do where I will offer to do like a presentation in their brokerage, basically educating them on all like the current market trends
Okay.
that's going on right now in their local market. But other than that, I just come up with different reasons like, hey, did you see this article? Or it's like typical sales stuff. I have a background in tech sales. So for me, we're just like always taught to have as many touch points as possible. So if there's some news article that comes out, we'll share that with them. If it's something that like, oh, this made me think of you, it's just really
Mhm.
traditional sales stuff, just finding reasons to touch point, stay on top of their mind. We have one realtor who we give referrals to. We've decided to do it exclusive to her because she's given us so many leads. So that's kind of like one
Hmm.
thing that helps us get top of mind for her. We also put up her signs in our homes. So we put up like we offer like a little business card and then like a sign like, hey, if you're looking for a realtor, this is like one that we recommend. So she likes us for that reason too. So every time she gets a lead from us, she's probably thinking of us. That's
Hmm.
probably helping. So yeah, all these
So
different
giving
things.
back, yeah, giving back to them for sure.
Yeah.
I've also heard of people that really make a strong effort to kind of map out, okay, which realtor did this lead come from that ended up becoming an owner, so that if at some point years down the line or whatever that particular owner wants to sell, but now the relationship is with you, well, kind of remembering that, okay, it was this real estate agent that brought it, so let's, let her or him know, like, just goes back to kind of like paying it back to them as well, not just with money but also with referrals. Let's talk a little bit about, you said there's also something you did that's creative as far as kind of getting lead opportunities from Evolve and companies out there. What is that about?
Yeah, so this is kind of a fun one. So basically, we had a really good like run of basically taking clients from Evolve, and we're like, huh, maybe there's something going on here. So it's really it's sort of simple, but it's just very manual labor. But it can be definitely fruitful. Is you go to Evolve and you look at the location and the photos, and ideally these listings have like outdoor photos of some kind, and based on that, you go to Google Map, you change it to satellite view, and you go ahead and like search for the address. Now, when you find the address, you can actually like look up the owner's name on like reversepeoplesearch.com or like whitepages.com, one of those websites, and you can find the owner's phone number that way. And then based on that, you kind of just call the owner. So you can see if they have a second home too. You can do some like mailing stuff if you want. But with that, you can call the owner and like see if they might be open to working with someone different. Because, and this, by the way, this tactic works especially well right about now, right after slow season, because they're very frustrated with the low revenue that they're getting with their current property management partner. So if you want to get some new co-hosting clients, this is the ideal time to do it. Yeah, and I don't know if it was you or me, but
Yeah,
something
looks like
seems
I
frozen
looks
right.
like it froze there for a second, but that makes a lot of sense. And so one of the tools you said was reverse people finder in terms of
Yeah,
finding.
I think it's reversepeoplefinder.com, something like that.
Okay, and the other one you mentioned as well,
White
white
pages.
white pages. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, so manually in that you have to identify the front picture or something, so you can then find the address. But then that that makes a lot of sense. And the timing piece that you just said as well, in terms of doing this right after they're frustrated with the low season, makes a lot of sense as well. Manish, to kind of wrap it up, what are some things that you see a lot of your students continuously make as a recurring mistake when they're trying to, grow into this space? And yeah, like maybe something you see as a recurring theme of any kind, either a recurring mistake or a recurring question that comes up. Just to kind of wrap it up with some final thoughts of wisdom or advice that you think might be relevant.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know the most common question we always get is how to do proper market research. And I understand why, because I think a lot of people want to make sure they're like when they're getting into an Airbnb, they have the right business like kind of mindset or business plan. So it is challenging to do projections and things like that. So yeah, one common mistake that I see is that when they're doing market research to determine like how the property revenue is going to perform, they're looking at slow season and they look at an empty calendar and they just get terrified. They're like, "Oh my God, this property is not going to work because the calendar is clearly empty."
Hmm.
And of course, Sebastian, because you do revenue, you understand how a lot of people don't know what they're doing when it comes to pricing. And so if you're in slow season, you see empty calendars across the board, it's probably because they suck at pricing. That's really just
Hmm.
what it comes down. And so just because they're that way doesn't mean that you're going to be that way. So that's one thing that I think is a really, really common like fear that I've seen from my students, especially lately, because slow seasons are almost universally
Mhm.
January and February across the board. So yeah, I think that's having an understanding of like slow season strategies and pricing is something that really like you can only understand with experience. And that's why I tell people when they want to quit their jobs to do this full time, like how I did, definitely go through at least one 12-month cycle. So that way you've
Mm.
experienced and you know how to prepare for it.
So, this is the last thing I wanna finish with, because you mentioned this earlier too. So when you mention something twice, there's something there, right? So you said earlier you didn't understand slow season the way you do it today, and now you're talking about the importance of having a proper, strategy for the low season. What does that look like, a proper strategy for the low season, and what have you learned about the best practices for achieving that?
So for me, it's just pretty much all hands on deck with marketing. We start anywhere from 3 to 4 months before slow season starts. We start building up the listings again on Furnish Finder. We pretty much go multi-platform. So we do Zillow, Facebook Marketplace. We may even consider Craigslist, although I haven't gone there yet. I don't really want to ever do Craigslist. But yeah, Zillow, Facebook Marketplace, Furnish Finder, Corporate House and by Owner. And we'll just go full, balls to the wall with just marketing things for midterm rentals. We'll adjust the Airbnb monthly pricings. We'll look for long term. We may even set minimums in advance, things like that. So that's kind of our goal. I think the longest slow season I've ever had in a market was like 5 months, like 4 or 5, maybe 6 months. So I
Mhm.
may even get like 6 month leads in there, just to kind of like wrap up the slow season.
Okay, interesting. So you're being a little bit more proactive, well, a lot more proactive about, where the bookings are going to come from, rather than just focus on pricing and discounting, and hope for the best on the same channels that you would just kind of let it be on during the high season. That makes sense. Very good point. All right. Well, listen, Mark, I could keep you here for 2 more hours, and we'd probably have, even more things to cover. But this has been very insightful, very helpful. I've taken some notes. I hope the audience has as well. Thanks for taking the time, man. It was great to have you on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Sebastian. And yeah, I guess one little shout out, I do mentorship. So if anybody needs any help, if you enjoy the stuff that was on this podcast, you're welcome to reach out to me. My name is Mo. You can email me at monish@angiestays.com. And yeah, thanks for having me, Sebastian.
Absolutely. No, and we'll make sure to put in your social media handles and profiles as well on the comment section, so people can stay in touch. And yeah, it was great to have you on. Thanks again, Manish. Have a good one.
Yeah. Too.